If we don't get the coal here, if we're not developing the coal here, it's going to come from somewhere else. So if a developing nation like Indonesia or China wants coal in order to underpin their industrial development, and Australia says, well, we're not going to provide that coal, they don't just go without it. They're going to get it from another nation. And quite often other nations in the world don't have the same safeguards and standards as we have. And that's without getting into the fact that our coal is more efficient than other coal, meaning that you don't need to burn as much of it to get a given amount of energy.
I'm Topher Field. My guest today is Daniel Wild from the Institute of Public Affairs. He's been doing something that's very close to my heart, and that is looking at the impact of green tape and regulation on our primary producers and those that create our energy and our food. If this is the sort of content that you like, then make sure you like, subscribe, and go to topherfield.net and join my email list so I can keep in touch even if I do get deplatformed. Now here's Daniel Wild. Well, Daniel Wild from the IPA joins me today. Daniel, thank you so much for your time.
Great to be with you.
Now, Daniel, you're actually the first person I've had from the IPA in quite some time, and many viewers may not be familiar. The Institute of Public Affairs, what does that even mean? What is that?
Well, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me on. The Institute of Public Affairs, in a nutshell, we're a centre-right research organisation focused on freedom and the Australian way of life. Most of the focus of the work that we do is on freedom of speech, ensuring there's a debate around climate science, policies such as net zero and energy policy, and education, both at schools and in the universities, and more generally on culture and values as well. As we've seen, so many of the major institutions of our society have a very negative view of our country and of our culture and our history. One of the things that we do is say, Australia is a pretty good country. There's a lot to be grateful for, and that's particularly relevant now that we've just had Australia Day. So, look, in a nutshell, that's what we do. At the end of the day, what we want to be able to do, and one of the reasons I'm so happy to be having a chat with you today, is to communicate this to the public. So many media organisations won't do that, so we want to make sure we're out in the public debate and communicating our research to the community and to policymakers. So that's what we do basically day in, day out.
All right, now I reached out. I wanted to have a chat with you specifically because I've been seeing some of your work coming through online. I follow the IPA online, and it's been very interesting to me. You've been up in Queensland. You've been travelling around talking to primary producers about the impact of green tape. That's a really dear topic to my heart. Those that know my work will know that I've spent a lot of time travelling around the Murray-Darling Basin, which is a bit further south than where you've been, and very concerned about the impact of the Murray-Darling Basin Authority and what is effectively green tape and government regulation on the impact of those primary producers. But I've got to admit, I really was not aware of basically any of what you've been uncovering and discovering and talking about while you've been up there. So can you bring us up to speed? Why did you go up there? What's the actual problem that you're trying to investigate, and what are some of the things that you've uncovered?
Well, there's a couple of things. The first is that so many Australians living in the regions or the outer suburbs just don't have a voice in the debate anymore. A lot of it's driven by the inner city elites in Sydney, Brisbane, Melbourne, Canberra, who are imposing policies on our primary producers and the resources sector without really understanding what's going on the ground and the kind of impact this is having on the Australians that are, putting food on our table and keeping the lights on. And so they play a critical role for, the local communities that they're based in, and also for our society more generally. And look, what we found in terms of research, and I'll give you the example of Queensland, is that since the year 2000, we've seen the total number of people employed as bureaucrats in environmental departments in Queensland increase by 50%. Whereas at the same time, over that period, the number of Queenslanders employed in the agricultural sector has halved. And so we're seeing the effect of green tape really bite farmers and landowners. And look, the main feedback we get from the community is they're not really consulted on this. They have, again, these city-based bureaucrats. They might be well-intentioned, they might not, I don't know, but they're going out to the farms and they don't have any idea of how their green tape and regulations are restricting the capacity of farmers and landowners to get onto the job. And, one of the things that's really concerning is that, every time you drive past a farm or you see a truck full of cattle or a field full of grain, that's not just to be eaten, that's revenue for a new school or a new road or a new hospital. This all gets reinvested back into the community. But the issue we have is a lot of these city-based bureaucrats just don't understand how wealth is created, and that's one of the big challenges we have in our nation.
Okay, so there's a few things I want to pick up on here. I've seen, and this is partly my own research as well as watching the work that you've been doing, there are things as disparate and as distant as carbon dioxide emissions causing green tape to be applied to farmers, things like the Great Barrier Reef causing restrictions to be applied, various species on land, whether that be plant or animal species, etc. Can you give us a few specific examples for the city ones among us who really don't know what life on the land is like? What are a couple of the specific policies that farmers have raised some concern about that they weren't consulted on?
Well, the Great Barrier Reef is a important example, especially in Queensland, but it affects the whole country, where that's basically used as a catch-all. So if you are, say, setting up a mine, they'll argue that emissions that come from that coal out of that mine will heat the planet, cause the temperature to rise in the seas, and that will kill the Great Barrier Reef. So that's a long bow to draw, but that's an argument that's often made, and it goes through the courts. Sure. And then for the farmers, there's an argument that all the runoff, so the chemicals that are used in the farming process that are necessary to produce the crops and the grains and everything, that runs off into the Great Barrier Reef and negatively affects the Great Barrier Reef. And we've done a lot of work with Dr. Peter Ridd, who your audience is probably familiar with, and he's outlined extensively why these arguments just don't hold water when you look into the details. But again, it's not about the actual facts of the matter. There's an ideological agenda that's being pursued. Again, I have no doubt that there's many in the bureaucracy and environmental advocates that have pure motives. They genuinely believe they're helping the world and the planet, but at the end of the day, it's causing immense damage to farmers and landowners who have concerns for the environment as well. I mean, no one cares more than the health and longevity of their own farm than farmers. They want to pass it on to their kids and the next generation to make sure they've got good food and fibre. So there's this misunderstanding of what actually goes on the land, which is fundamentally part of the problem.
Well, I find that last point is a particularly good one in the Australian context, where our farms, our mines, etc., tend to be among the environmentally best in the world. I'll give you an example from further down south. When I was in Tasmania last year, we had Bob Brown on television in Tasmania spruiking the idea of this great green energy transmission and all of the batteries and various electric technology that was needed for that. And when the question was put to him about the need to mine all of the minerals and the raw materials to go into that, he insisted that we shouldn't increase mining in Australia, but that we should, and I'm this is literally what he said, my jaw hit the floor, we should bring those resources from Africa. Now, from an environmental perspective, putting aside any human rights concerns, from an environmental perspective, that's insane. The environmental damage done by those sorts of activities in other countries with lower standards than ours is far greater than ours. What's the impact in terms of the effect on industry, the effect on Australia's food security, but also the effect on the environment as a result of shutting down so much of our own primary production?
Yeah, it's an important point. And the reality is that if we don't get the coal here, if we're not developing the coal here, it's going to come from somewhere else. So if a developing nation like Indonesia or China wants coal in order to underpin their industrial development, and Australia says, well, we're not going to provide that coal, they don't just go without it. They're going to get it from another nation. And quite often other nations in the world don't have the same safeguards and standards as we have. And that's without getting into the fact that our coal is more efficient than other coal, meaning that you don't need to burn as much of it to get a given amount of energy. So you're spot on to make that observation. It's always been one of the curious parts of the environmental movement sometimes in Australia. And it makes you think, well, are they motivated by interests of improving environmental outcomes and climate outcomes, or are they motivated by what is in essence sort of an anti-capitalism ideology? And I think there's probably a bit of both if we're going to be honest. And look, the other point that I'd make is it's important to reinforce, because farmers are often given I don't think they're really given an honest hearing on these issues, which is that they want to look after what they have. If they've got cattle, they want the cattle to be healthy. If they've got grain or crops, they want that to be high quality. They want to make sure that they're environmental stewards. There's an attitude from a lot of these activists that farmers are opposed to environmental outcomes, that there's some kind of dichotomy between the two. And, nothing. Anyone who knows a farmer or has been around a farm will know there's nothing further from the truth.
Sure. Sure. Well, look, I can buttress that. I've met many farmers along the Murray-Darling Basin or throughout the Murray-Darling Basin in my work, and the number of them that can point out to you whole areas of the farm that they never cleared, even back when they would have had permission to clear it. I mean, these days they wouldn't get permission, but even when they could have, they chose not to because they liked the birds that nested in there, and they liked having that sort of environment on their property. Not to mention the effective water in channels and so forth as breeding grounds as well. But that's another topic for another time. Daniel, before we finish, we've only got a couple of minutes left. The IPA obviously are very involved in not just wanting to talk about these sorts of issues, but trying to actually bring about better outcomes in some way. Tell us a bit about the work that you're doing to try and raise awareness and bring some better outcomes for on these issues.
Yeah, look, the key thing that we do is research. So everything we do is based on research and analysis. And then what we want to do is take it out there to the community. So the main way we're doing that in this context is going through these regional tours. So as we mentioned at the top of our chat, we've had 3 of these throughout North Queensland and New South Wales. We've got another six or so tours planned through regional Australia. And the point is to get out to the communities that are feeling it, that are incurring the costs, and to give them a bit of a voice in the debate. That's the key feedback we get from these tours and the stakeholders we meet, is that no one's speaking up for them. They've lost a lot of confidence in their local representatives, their local members of parliament. They don't see their views or values reflected in the mainstream media. So there's a concern that they're just not being heard. So one of our goals is to say, look, we've done the research, we've studied it, we've looked at what's happening, and we want to go out there and make sure that you're being represented in the debate. So that's what these regional tours are really all about, is getting out there and making sure that mainstream Australians have a voice.
If someone wanted to come along to one of those tours, where should they look for information?
Well, look, the first thing to do is visit our website, ipa.org.au. So all of the information goes up there. And then as we start developing and scoping out these tours, more information comes out about how you can catch up with us and how you can become involved. But just check out the website as a first step.
Fantastic. Daniel Wild from the Institute of Public Affairs, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Topher.
Thank you so much for watching. I'm Topher Field, and I wouldn't be able to do this without the help of my incredible supporters. So go to topherfield.net, scroll down a little bit, and you'll see there's a couple of different ways you can support me and help me to do more of this sort of work. You can buy some merchandise, you can give a one-off donation by buying me a coffee through PayPal, or you can jump onto my Subscribestar and become an ongoing supporter. All of those links are available at topherfield.net. Don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a comment, and make sure you join my email list as well so that I can still keep in touch with you even when I do inevitably get cancelled. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.